All right, welcome back to PacWest Bigfoot. This is David, and I have another encounter story here from a young lady up in Washington State. First and foremost, I want to say thank you very much to Leanne, who will have her interview out here in the next couple days. And thank you, Leanne, for being on here. Also, just wanted to let you guys know, I had a few of you asking about creating your own journals and blogs about your research with Bigfoot and everything like that. And if you want some professional help with that, that is actually what I do for a living. So you guys can get in on that. Just send me over an email at pacwestbigfoot@gmail.com. You can also go to pacwestbigfoot.com and enter your name and email in there. Follow along with the old clan here and get in on some of those free giveaways. This month got an autographed book here, The Minnesota Iceman by William Jevning. So that's going to be this month's giveaway. So I'm going to clear my throat, take a sip of this Sasquatch coffee. By the way, I'm also going to have Gunner on here, the owner and operator of Sasquatch Coffee Company, and also Monster X Radio is going to be on here pretty soon. So we're going to do an interview with him and a sit-down, little banter back and forth. For now, let's get going on with this particular encounter story, and off we go. Forrester tells of her frightening Bigfoot encounter near Mount St. Helens. My name is Carol, and I'm a forester in the state of Washington, and I had a rather frightening experience or run-in with Bigfoot up near Mount St. Helens a few summers back. At the time, I was not doing any foresting, per se. I was camping and doing a little research myself, as I am really into my job, even today. What kind of research does a forester do when off the clock? Well, I love nature and study it constantly. Here is my encounter and what got me into that mess in the first place. Oh, and no, I do not believe these things are oversized Ewoks either. I think they are wild and can be dangerous. Forest girl, nature lover. No, I am not the earth-loving type of gal. I just love the outdoors and working in them if I can. Being a forester, I got to spend a lot of time out here and during all 4 seasons at that. Even now, a few years later, after coming almost face-to-face with something most only think a myth or phantom of the forest at best, I still love it out here, and I still do my job. And for you that do not believe, don't. I just don't care either way what you think, because I know the truth. These things, this creature, or better yet, this animal called Bigfoot or Sasquatch, does exist. I know. I saw one. The sighting happened during a short camping trip where I was getting some self-education in. And yes, even when I was not working, I'm actually working. Call me dedicated to my future, but I wanted to get a full-time job when I was done with school with the National Forest Service, not just clearing brush and trails. Mostly I did management, and by that I mean I cleared brush, as I said, and kept trails clear for hikers and day trippers. This trip would take me up around Mount St. Helen, actually near Spirit Lake, but not the lake itself. I wanted to learn more about the rapid regrowth around the area, and as we can tell, the destruction became a little bit of a plus for the lake over time and the surrounding area. But enough of my thoughts on science and forestry. I want to share with you what does lurk out here in the woods of Washington State, something I never expected or believed in until that moment. And by the way, as I said above, I am still working as a forester, and I will not be revealing my name or identity, period. So Carol is not my real name. And just so you know, my personal research into Bigfoot in this particular region, well, suffice it to say, I can say that they are not friendly. They are wild animals and deserve that kind of respect. Setting up camp and following footprints. I do some side research today into the subject of Bigfoot, but this day, the day I realized they did exist, I was simply out doing research near Spirit Lake in the Gifford National Forest, actually just east of the lake about 5 miles. And yes, I had permission. And that is what is cool about being a student of forestry, I suppose. A little more freedom when working with them and the Forest Service. It was a little bit of a hike in from where I was dropped off by my friend. She was heading out that weekend to see her mom in the eastern part of the state. She would take me only so far, however. She dropped me off where I would get a ride once again from another friend at the Mount St. Helens Learning Center. From there, I would be given not just a ride, but a radio as well. I will call her Jessica for now, but that was not her real name. She is a full-time employee of the Forest Service and a good friend who dropped me off and picked me up Sunday evening. The trip would not last as long as I thought the hike did, but where I was going, well, there were no roads, not even old logging roads for about 2 to 3 miles in either direction from me. It was out in the literal middle of nowhere, with a radio for help and an old radio for music. I did carry a laptop with me, but no internet, as it was simply not available there. I would only take notes and log them into the school website later. I finally reached my destination, and amazingly enough, the trees were dense, and the brush was thick. After only 30-plus years of a major catastrophe, creation had put itself back together, and fast. I found a decent area and plenty of open space to have a fire safely burning. It felt like and looked like I was in a real campground at first. I had set up my tent, unloaded a few other things from my oversized backpack, and decided to put together a little fire pit for cooking and a campfire. I dug a little pit, gathered some rocks to put around it, and grabbed my small hatchet and started gathering wood. It was still early and warm, so I figured I had time to get the wood, chop up some kindling, and even get some research in. I was about 15 yards away from camp when I noticed some tracks. After a moment, they looked more like footprints than which they were. At first, I figured they were bear prints, but on a much better look at another footprint nearly 5 feet away, I could make out toes. I could also make out 4 distinct tracks, and as I followed them, they became more like impressions on the debris-laden forest floor. Whatever it was had toes like a person and a stride that seemed to have stretched at least 5 feet between each footprint. I did feel a little uneasy all of a sudden, and my mind started drifting back to old stories told to me by my dad and family around the campfire, of tales about the creature or animal called Bigfoot. Of course, I had heard the jokes that spread around the foresters and my whole field in general about it, but that was all they were, jokes, right? The thoughts in my head started turning into real questions as I turned around and went back to study closer the original footprints that were clearly human-like. The only odd part about them was the big toe. It seemed a little bit more like a monkey's toe, protruding outward at a weird angle. I stood up, looked around for a few, and decided I would finish getting the firewood and get to some studying before I started down some rabbit trail of thoughts about Bigfoot. Shoot, at the moment, I was still not really buying into the belief they existed. Whatever it was could not be around. The tracks looked to be a day or two old. But then again, I am not a tracker. I study mostly botany. So what would I know about how long they were there? Apparently, they were fresher than I thought. Much fresher. Whistle while you work. In the woods. I finished gathering wood and started off down a small game trail to get some research done before sunset. I also chose the path away from the footprints I had found just in case. However, the craziness of the find still ran through my head in between the work I had to do and the breaks I took from it. A whistle. I heard a whistle about 30 minutes or so into my work. What in the world whistles out here? I figured it was a bird of sorts, but the whistle itself was, well, it sounded a little deeper than a bird. I hope you can understand what I mean by that. It came from in back of me, in the direction of my camp. I decided that it might be someone, a person, so I headed back to camp just in case it was my friend who might have come back for some reason or another. Nobody. Even on the way back to the camp, I heard and saw nothing and nobody. It was getting later in the afternoon, and by that point, it was actually closing in on sunset soon, so I opted for getting an early go in the morning and started making an early dinner instead. A whistle again, this time from the west of my camp. It was the same loud, deep whistle I heard earlier. I have to say I've never heard anything like it before, and this time, it being a bird was completely ruled out. It was not a bird. It sounded more like a person whistling, and a person with a great set of lungs. Of course, because of the devastation nearly 3 decades earlier, Vegetation was still somewhat lacking, but there was enough that at that time of day kept me from seeing too far into the semi-thick brush and forest. I looked around and even squinted a bit to try and see in further and maybe see what was making the sound, but I could not see anything. I then turned and got back to making dinner for myself after a few seconds of looking around. It was a few moments later that I heard a loud snap, like a limb breaking from the same general direction of that last whistle. This caught me off guard, as it was pretty loud and startled me. I literally spilled the beans. Seriously, I had dropped a can of beans I had just opened. I have heard a tree crash in the night, and I have heard limbs break off in the wind. It was not windy that day or evening. That is what caught me off guard. There are people out here in the woods. Not many from what we know, but the so-called forest people are not all that nice for the most part. And that was my concern to what, or better yet, who was creating the sounds. I had never felt weird about being that female college girl out in the woods alone, ever. Never. All of a sudden, however, I did. The hair on my neck stood on end as I started to clean up the mess I just made, all the while keeping my eyes peeled from movement and my ears tuned in for any weird sounds the same. It was circling me. There is a difference between the safety training you get as a forester and what you get with the Forest Service. Really different. Unfortunately, at that time, I was a forester and did not know the whole situation I was in. I do today, though. I did know enough to start the debate in my mind about staying or going. If I were to leave now, I would make it back to the main road just as it got dark, and I could call my friend and get a ride. I also realized that if I called her now, she just might be there by the time I got to the road, or not long after that. At the moment, I heard another loud snap, and that was the moment I figured I would go with my gut and leave now. Too bad I did not leave sooner. I started packing everything up, everything. Looking back now, I know that I can always come back and come back with someone else and collect the things when it was safer. So I didn't pack everything up. I left a few things behind. But I wanted to get all my stuff, and besides, if we were a crazy forest person, well, I can defend myself, and I was alarmed, and I was armed with bear spray. Actually, that was the first thing I did. I hooked this bear spray on my belt. It was when I started on tearing down the tent that I heard something or someone pacing or walking back and forth. Actually, in circles. The nervousness turned into fear that moment, I remember. It was footsteps, literal human-like footsteps, so I could hear walking. And as I listened, I could tell that it was basically, circling my camp, circling me. I sped up the packing and also dialed my friend to come and pick me up ASAP. I told them what I was experiencing and even kept up the conversation for a few, trying to maybe create some facade that I was I was not truly alone up here after all, just in case it was or were forest people. After I was packed up and ready to go, I hung up the phone and started the trek back to the main road, escorted by a giant creature. I started down the trail I came in on after a few minutes or so. I could tell I was still not alone, and whatever it was still followed me and seemed to be circling me as we walked along. It was getting even darker, but not quite pitch black by any means. But it would have been in about an hour, and maybe an hour and a half at most. Eventually, my worst nightmare, something I never expected to see, made itself known just through the dark woods. It was massive. It was a Bigfoot. I heard it snap another limb the moment just before I caught a visual of it. I looked over to my left, and there it was, a massive and tall silhouette standing there. I stopped for just a moment. I was almost paralyzed, to tell you the truth. I just stood there, staring at this thing. It stood at least 7 to 8 feet tall. It did not take but a second or more after that, but it took a huge step forward out of the darkness and into a patch of light. It was a female, and it really was what I feared, a Bigfoot. She stood nearly 7 to 8 feet in height, as I said. and it was hairy, and her face was long, with a small mouth that looked to be making some sort of grimace. She was a dark reddish-brown color, and her skin was dark around the eyes and nose. It was the only area that seemed to have hair whatsoever. She grunted, and even seemed to follow it with a type of huffing sound. I could not tell much, but I could tell she was not happy with me there. Crash, 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 snap. She immediately started walking towards me, crashing her way through the thick underbrush, and snapped off a large limb along the way, tossing it aside as she came to a stop and went to all fours. I did not even notice for a second, but I had squatted down and was shivering with my hands over my head as if something was crashing down on me. If I did not get out of there, I thought at that moment, something would come crashing down on me, I believed. Her, and with all her weight and power. Run, Forrest, run. I got up and started running, and so did she. I decided at that moment to release some bear spray in the air, as that was supposed to keep predators and other bears away as well. I believe it worked. She still followed me, but kept at a distance. I was still in almost panic mode, but I kept up the pace. I had to stop and walk once in a while, as I could not make it all the way back running. It was a trail I was on, and not a well-maintained one. I did not want to fall and severely hurt myself and be unable to protect myself from this thing. I felt like it was menacing me for a reason. I stopped again minutes later, and this time, to my right, I could see her. This time she bared some extremely large block teeth at me as she stood in front of some trees, and then she let out a scream that nearly shattered my eardrums. I started running again as this sound vibrated through me. And I could feel her running. Literally, I could feel her movement along the ground. Her crashing through the forest created as much sound and vibration as a scream that sounded worse than that screaming rock music my ex-boyfriend used to play all the time. It was frightening. The Red Rock Road. I made it. The road paved with that old red volcanic rock and clay mixture laid before me. The crashing stopped. The screaming, though, through the trees came to an end as well. It took me a bit to get back to the road, not as long when running, though, either way. It was another 15 minutes before my friend could be seen speeding up the old dirt road. I have never been that frightened in my life. As I jumped in the car, she looked at me and pointed in the rearview mirror. She was there, the Bigfoot, standing on the side of the road, swaying and watching us as we sped off. There were no words for about 10 or so minutes. I was in shock, I was petrified, and then I was overwhelmed by curiosity. Weird, I know. I worked in the forest today, and in more professional capacity, so my name will only be Carol to you and others. I love the forest, still, and love my job working out here in the forests of Washington. Yet at the same time, I keep a healthy respect for everything in it. I will tell you this, we do know about Bigfoot. What it is, and some, little, of its behaviors. It is an awesome animal. It is a powerful animal. It is a wild one, so respect it, and give it some room whenever you find yourself near one. Thank you.